In the game of Survivor, there are many questions. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? And who has the best story? That's the mission of the Survivor storytellers. It's what they do.
That is indeed what we do, for we are the Survivor storytellers. How are you tonight, Casey?
I'm doing well, a little tired, but I'm ready to kick into the season. How about you, Tiki?
I've got to admit, I am very optimistic about everything that we've seen so far. I think things are playing out where this is definitely the best storytelling that we've seen in Survivor in the new era, and I would say probably even since David versus Goliath. I really think this season's shaping up where I said it on the last podcast that we recorded around the merge, and I'll say it again. Each and every person on this cast has delivered in some way, shape, or form, even if it's just like a moment, even if it's just like a single confessional. I would wager to say that all 9 people that are left in the final 9 are like this is like an anti-Survivor 41 right here, where it's like we got a good boot order. Not to say we didn't lose people, we didn't lose fan favorites along the way, but I would say all 9 of these people are just prepped and ready. There's a lot of stories going on. Can't wait to get into it all.
Yeah, and so I guess we kind of do this at the beginning of each podcast, but yeah, we could take just a couple minutes real quick to talk about this season itself from a non-storytelling perspective. But I agree. I mean, I've said it a couple times on the podcast and off the podcast to people. This is genuinely, from an all-around perspective, one of the best seasons that we actually have had since David versus Goliath. And honestly, depending on how these last handful of episodes shape up, it could even be better than David versus Goliath.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm that hyped about it yet.
That's what I'm saying. It could be, which then if it is better than David versus Goliath, it puts it as one of the best seasons since Millennials versus Gen X, which goes back quite a while at this point. But yeah, it was fun to get the auction back in a way that is not game breaking. We got, we have a lot of different stuff going on with a lot of colorful characters without them being over the top colorful.
What's really refreshing too about this past episode in particular, Probst himself has come back into his own as another colorful character. Seriously, this past episode, which I'm sure we'll break down, has some all-time great Probst moments in it, which is that's almost like me breathing a sigh of relief, because I really thought the best of Jeff Probst was behind us.
Oh yeah, 100%. But even some of the best of Jeff Probst was a little much, especially when you go to seasons the late teens, early 20s. Some of his sass is just a tad bit too much, especially when he came at Courtney during Heroes versus Villains. Sure. I always think of that as an example. But yeah, really, really great season, really fun, lots of stuff going on. So let's kind of take it to our first segment of this podcast, where we're going to talk about the individual player story of the people who have actually finished their run in Survivor. So we'll start off with the most recent boot, which in this case is Kelly. So what did you think about Kelly's story? Does it make sense for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kelly was a very, very well-crafted edit. And I think my impression of her that I said last episode was that in a more old school season, I feel like she would have had the generic winner's edit, just because it's we're always getting her edit. Really reminded me of Michelle Fitzgerald 1.0 in the sense that we were always checking in with her even when it didn't really matter to the story. We were always getting beats with what was her pulse on the game. Unfortunately, once she started getting tied heavily into Bruce, I could kind of see the writing on the wall, especially with Bruce having the idol and everything. But I think that Kelly's arc, from going from basically the biggest free agent of the season to ironically being taken down specifically because Bruce himself basically, like, it wasn't even her fault. It wasn't like she was, like, intentionally trying to, like, pull a Sherry Beatman and be like, hey, Bruce, you're going to be my Phillip, it was literally Bruce's fault. So I
Yeah.
don't know. There's something very poetic. I really do feel like her boot is going to be a turning point in the story. And with her character type, I mean, let's be honest here. There's a lot of times where her specific character type can get under edited, and she didn't have the flashiest edit by any means, but like I said, the edit did kind of go out of its way to really make sure that we were checking in with her headspace each and every episode.
Yeah, I also I'm searching up the confessional count real quick. It's always fun to see that. But so yeah, I mean that's the thing with Kelly. We said the same thing, I think, on the podcast last time, where like we've been getting the Kelly check-ins, which usually is a good sign. Now, when you compare it to an edit like Michelle Fitzgerald, totally makes sense. But for anyone that is familiar with like the old EDGIC of Survivor, which is the editing logic of Survivor, Kelly does have more of a Michelle Fitzgerald. Now, for me, the quintessential winners edit, what would be the standards winners edit would be dominant edits followed by cooldown periods. Kelly didn't necessarily have that.
That's true, yeah.
But I did find that Kelly's edit was really good. And when it first got revealed that she was voted out, I was like, wait, really? Like, that's the end of her story? But then, like, within 5 minutes of the episode ending, I was like, okay, this actually makes sense. Kelly has been present but not dominant. And the reason why is she's sort of this like almost a tragic hero.
Totally.
And yeah, it is 100% because of Bruce.
And she had one of the most raw reactions to getting voted out in the new era so far, hands down. I mean, my heart goes out to her, but at the same time, I love to see it for the TV side of things. I mean, you know me. It's like I have been on that side of things, and I only played the game for like a couple hours, So it's like.
Now, for any one of our, new listeners out there that's listening in, Tiki's actually referring to something else that I do, which is I host my own online reality game, which we also have podcasts on this channel for that. But yeah, I love to see that raw reaction, not to get too far off the storytelling aspect of it. But yeah, I love to see that raw reaction. But this also just kind of goes into like part of the storytelling aspect where I absolutely feel for her, and it's because they did such a great job of painting each one of these players in the game. Like every week for the past like 4 weeks, I have just been absolutely devastated for someone that's been getting voted out. I genuinely can't remember. I don't even think, dare I say, a time in my Survivor history of watching, and I've been watching since season 1, where I have been devastated week after week after week. And it's like, I didn't want Jake to go home, but I was happy he was staying. But then I didn't want Kelly to go either.
I feel like those kind of scenarios are like, like as a viewer, you almost hate to see it, but you love to see it at the same time. The scenario where you are not going to be happy no matter who leaves out of the two. For me, it's like, it's both one of the most devastating and one of the most thrilling things about watching Survivor, is when you do get that, those two boot options that both feel like they bring so much to the table.
Yeah. And Jake has really grown on me as a player. So like, that's kind of why I was like, damn, like I do kind of want him to stay. But kind of finishing up with Kelly really quick. Yeah, so that's kind of where like it makes sense, her edit. She wasn't dominant. She wasn't under edited. She was consistent enough where her story was just like, especially last episode, they specifically showed moments where she was like, I don't think it's time for Bruce. I don't think it's time for Bruce. We really need him. And now look, we have that poignant part of her arc where it's like, that might have been her fatal flaw last episode. She's kind of like a tragic hero. But yeah, just crazy. But any last things with Kelly before we move on to Caleb?
No, I think you hit it right on the nose. And Caleb, all I can say with Caleb is that honestly, I was underwhelmed by his actual exit. But the only reason I say that, Casey, and I'm sorry, we're going to have to break away from the story and get into the actual production side of things here for a little bit, just because I think it very much affects the story. I cannot stand this BS of switching the people up and, like once they merge, it literally takes two different rounds of gameplay for them to actually come together for a vote. And with the earn the merge thing, I'm way more okay with it. I'm way more okay with that element because at the very least, they're all voting together. But I am just, Casey, I am up to here with, like, for me, the double boot was by far my least favorite episode of the season because it was pretty much all just like rushing through these two big characters who really should have had more time to shine in their individual. I mean, Sifu could have gone on a double boot, whatever. Honestly, with Sifu, I don't even really think we have to spend a whole segment on him. I felt like he had a lot of potential as a character, but really, like, I just don't think he ever really flourished on the island socially. And because of that, I feel like he was very awkward in front of the camera. So it was just kind of like one of those things. But Caleb was, I don't know. Like, for me, there's a lot of missed potential with the Caleb storyline where, I mean, for example, by doing this, you rob the audience of a story point, which the audience, everyone was expecting to be like a big focal point in the story, which is when does Emily get rid of Caleb? You rob the audience of that because guess what? They ended up on different teams. They're not even voting together. Sure, Emily gets a confessional where she says she's ready to ditch Caleb, and and that is good for her edit. I will say that much, that she did get that confessional. But I don't know, man. To me, it felt so underwhelming that, like after such a big play like Shot in the Dark, that his fate ultimately just kind of gets sealed with like, well, you didn't wind up with the right people. I don't know. So both storytelling wise and from a production point of view, man, if I like, production's been doing a lot of changes for the better. This past episode just truly felt like fan service overload with the auction stuff. But man, I am so over that double tribal council, the second episode after the merge, man.
So with that, I'll give my 10-second production standpoint. Not a fan of it. Really, especially once you're in the merge, you really should not de-merge. It doesn't make sense. Whereas I think realistically, what they could have done was that double boot could have just happened in episode or two before. They could have done two tribes. Two of the three tribes go to tribal council. Yeah. Then the next episode you do earn the merge. But you know what? With this double boot, though, what I'll say is, speaking on Kayla, actually kind of speaking on both of them, we said it two episodes ago on our last podcast that like for me, I did not get the whole Emily Caleb thing. I know that was something that you had brought up in the previous podcast before, but I think with Caleb, his time was he was on borrowed time. And I think it was inevitable that he would actually get out sooner or later. And Sifu was the same thing. Sifu was not having a very dominant edit. His edit was very much on the I want Jay out or like wah, 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 like thing at Tribe Life. So in a sense, for double boots, that was actually the most promising. You know what?
That's a good point with Caleb's boot basically being inevitable. That is a good point.
Yeah, and I think so. I think the absolute best possible boots on a double boot were actually Sifu and Caleb. It just made the most sense. Caleb was playing a really good game, but therefore his game was too good that he was not managing his threat level. So I think like after the super high of the J vote out, it only made sense that like his time was inevitable. So I actually don't have much to say in regards to Caleb and Sifu. Their edits make sense. Sifu was not very dominant. Caleb, it was inevitable. And I think with the whole Emily thing, she already voted for Caleb the prior round.
This is true. This is true. Yeah.
So
Okay.
that was kind of my thing with the boot outs. I don't really have much to say, like I said, about Sifu either.
I think it's pretty clear that Caleb is definitely like, if they're going to do a returnee season, he's probably got a spot on it based on his edit.
I could see Caleb being a strong contender as
or
well
second
as
chance too, or something like that.
Same thing with Austin. Austin's our closest, golden boy character we have to this season. 3 different advantages throughout the season. Currently 2 hidden immunity idols. But anyway, yeah. Do you have any final thoughts on Caleb and I guess Sifu as well in terms of their story?
Not really. With Sifu, I actually kind of feel bad for him because, like I said, I do just genuinely get the vibe that he just never socially connected with the people that he was with. And I kind of like, every time he was on screen, I could kind of like feel him, like kind of trying to get in with people, but just not being able to. And I feel that. So, and plus I do hard feel the whole thing with, I don't want to make a big deal out of it. I don't want to turn it into a big debate, but him not making the jury was pretty painful. Like, for it to be that character in particular, both from an entertainment and TV perspective, and just from how much he wanted to play, it was pretty hard. Like, that was the hardest part of his boot for sure, I think.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, with Sifu, it was kind of, it was pretty obvious that he was going. I think he only had, and I'm actually going to double check the confessional chart right now. He had 1 confessional on the double boot episode. And that confessional was super sad, super sympathetic. And it's just like, that was his prominent spot in that episode. So it made sense. Kind of wish my, suspension of disbelief, I wish I would be able to suspend my disbelief a little bit more. But once again, for a double boot episode, it was still a really good episode. And it was pretty clear, what was going to happen. Because I think the more prominent story to pay attention to in that was the second tribal, where there were possibilities. There was a pretty cool plan with Jake in place. So to focus more on the second tribal and have the obvious boot out being first all made sense for me.
All right, well, let's transition to the people that are left then.
Yes, which I also will say for our remaining players, everybody is actually really starting to even out confessional count wise, which is absolutely fantastic because it really kind of is like
Emily's gotten a huge cooldown post merge.
Oh yeah. She went from dominating 6 to 7 confessionals per episode to these last couple episodes just having 2 confessionals per episode. Emily, Drew, and Julie are actually currently our outliers. Everyone else has been evening out at about 30 to high 20s, low 30 confessional counts. Drew has actually had Drew's been getting a pretty prominent edit, and it actually mainly has to do with this last episode. But even if you take that last episode's out, once again, everyone's averaging out at about 30. Julie's got 17 confessionals, Drew's got 37, and Emily has 40. So yes, transitioning to our final segment here, we have our remaining story arcs. So what do you think are some of these, prominent story arcs that we're seeing come the final stretch of this season?
I mean, I think the main one is just going to be the Bello versus Riva, which, if you break it down, it is a pretty traditional, I could see this being the first Pagonging of the new era. I honestly could. But other than that, of course, we have the Katura versus Bruce stuff, which I really don't know. Here is one thing I will say, Casey, as far as the storylines and potential winners and stuff. This is easily the first time in the new era where I can just look at the edit and be like, I don't know who's winning. I genuinely have no idea. I think every contender has faults. For example, I was pretty damn high on Emily last episode. I said that I would be genuinely kind of surprised if she didn't win. I don't think that anymore. And it's not just because she's gone to cool down. It's because, like, as a character, I feel like, frankly, she's kind of like just faded into the background, and she just very much has that vibe of a character that was a big pre-merge edit because she was the single person from her tribe to make it into the merge. And I think that's about it. I think that's why she got the edit that she got in the pre-merge. And I think she could place anywhere now. Katura, honestly, if I were to guess anyone, I would probably say Katura probably has the best shot, just based on the fact that they're having so much emphasis on the Bruce stuff, and it's been such a long-term storyline. But I don't know. There's big holes there. I mean, it's like the Reva people specifically basically goaded her into, like, thinking that getting Bruce out was her idea this past episode, which I think is terrible for her story. To me, it kind of had shades of, like, Cassidy Clark with the Ryan thing. So
Interesting comparison.
Yeah, so I genuinely, a lot of people say that Dee is a front runner, and I agree that on paper, game logic wise, she is. But honestly, I think her edit has been kind of middle of the road, and there are so many holes with each of these people's edits. But that's what makes it fun, though.
Absolutely. Like, once again, especially confessionals are usually a really good way to determine someone's winner edit. But yes, everyone's been getting a really solid edit that I could see from a game and story perspective, any one of these people winning. Now, kind of going back to Emily for a second, based on everything you were saying with Emily, I could see her having a winner's edit from a dominant edit to a nice cool down period to it picking back up, which is the closest thing to the standard winner's edit when it comes to the edgic. But also with Emily, I think Emily, even from an outside game perspective, Emily's edit is actually really cool because it is a legitimate sort of self-end game journey where she had this strong idea of what it means to be a Survivor player, what it means to be a winner, and she's completely did a 180. Now, based on the edit, here's actually what I'm actually thinking is going to happen. I could see Emily going far with Drew and Austin. And if that's the case, I don't see her winning. But I'm really actually getting strong story vibes of Emily, Drew, and Austin. And Dee, I could see winning, but I think also they have been sure to mention, especially in these last couple episodes, there's these nuggets of Dee is a strong player, Dee is this, Dee is that.
Right.
But it never means anything in the episode. So the question is why do they keep showing that if it means nothing 2 minutes later? Because odds are she's either winning, or B, that is everyone being like, she's a strong player, and then it's going to come to it, this is the time to strike. So that's kind of what I'm seeing with Dee, Austin, Emily, and Drew. As for Katura,
Drew, for me, I'm curious if you're getting this vibe. I think that Drew, from literally episode 1, has been set up as like the big downfall edit of the season. So if I were to place money on it, I could totally see Drew being like the big 7th place shocker boot. I easily could see him being the first Reba to fall.
Interesting. What in the story is giving you that like idea?
Just his cockiness. Like, for example, this last episode, you could, like, he wanted to go with the plan to just, to just keep the vote straightforward and not shift it onto Kelly, but he didn't get his way. Like, there's just little things where he's one of my favorite character moments from him in the whole season actually happened this past episode when Emily told him about the all-female alliance, and it wasn't even anything that he said. It was just the look on his face, because you could just see so many ideas just swirling around in his head. Like, you could tell his freaking Ivy League brain was just going crazy in that moment. So I don't know. I mean, I truly do think that they've edited him to be overly cocky, overly sure of himself. Um, I do think he's a great player as far as, like I really like his approach of being upfront and honest with his alliance. That is kind of how I would play a game if I were to get into an alliance, was I would try and have that kind of reputation where, I am blunt with people. And, a lot of people read the, the Brando moment where he denies Brando the Nerd Alliance thing. A lot of people say that was bad for him, but I don't know. For me, it kind of like reinforces his gameplay of just being a straight shooter. I just think with how the edits built him up, I think he's like a boss more so than a winner, if that makes sense.
Interesting. I mean, once again, I really could see from a number of these players, because of how fair they've all gotten their edits, anyone can winning. But I'm also starting to think that realistically, at the end of the day, Drew and Dee are probably the closest thing to clear winners that we have. Now, not by a ton, because like Drew, yeah, they painted him in the beginning as the Survivor superfan archetype. And then we saw some interesting moments with him that kind of really contradicted that edit, being the lie to Dee and Julie about, the Sifu idol hunt, and then the denying the alliance thing. But he's becoming a very central figure. He's a central figure in him and Austin. He's a central figure within the Reba 4, and he's a central figure between him and Emily. In 3 different circles, he is probably the most prominent player.
I see what you're saying. I definitely see what you're saying.
Whereas, like, you look at some of the other players, and once again, I genuinely could see any one of these players winning. I think some people, maybe by the edit and also by the gameplay, have a little bit more of an uphill battle, but like I could see almost any of them winning. But I think at the closest thing to an uphill battle would be Kendra, Jake, Julie, and Katurah. And I only mention Julie because of the Reba 4. She has the least dominant edit of those 3.
She's got to get out from if Julie's going to win, she's got to get out from the shadow of the Reba 4. That's the thing. Because she did a very, very good job in the pre-merge of being one of the people that made sure that alliance stuck tight. And that is like her gameplay so far, is being that, that lockstep. But the problem is literally all 3 other people in her alliance are more flashy, bold players than she is. So
yeah.
Austin, can we say one thing about Austin?
Oh, absolutely.
The sandwich arc kind of died on a whimper because he made no mention of the sandwich when they voted out Kelly.
I know, which I said this. I am sad at myself for not picking this up. But like after the episode ended, that was like the first episode in years that I've watched with my whole family. And we watched it, and my brother ends up saying like, "Oh, that's so awesome. Austin now has a full idol." And I was like, "He has a full idol." Yeah, they made no mention about the advantages for that.
That makes me think that Austin's advantages are ultimately not going to mean much.
Maybe, but it's still something that should have been told in the story. And it would have been interesting if the sandwich thing was there, but he also very well might have not said anything about the sandwiches.
That's true. That's true.
But
yeah.
I think it was just kind of like a fun little thing come merge of the whole sandwich storyline.
Similarly, I honestly don't see a scenario where Drew actually uses his safety without power advantage. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of these advantages that are just going to get sat on. I mean, I don't know, but I almost kind of feel like at this point, Drew using it would put more of a target on his back than it's worth.
See, I actually think it's going to come back to really save him, which is also, if that ends up happening, then
that would be cool. I would be, because I actually really like that twist, by the way. That is one of the new era powers that I actually do really appreciate.
Safety without power.
Okay, there's a couple things I want to bring up. First of all, I want to tell you why Jake is my favorite character of the season, but I maybe want to save that for last because I feel like he has had one of the most compelling storylines. So really quick, what?
I was just going to say, if you want to save that for last, could I touch upon something really quick? Because I know we're kind of running down to our last handful of minutes here before we have to go. So I just wanted to do like a rapid fire of some stuff here. So one of the big storylines that has been literally present since the very first episode is the Couture and Bruce thing. And honestly, a lot of people for the Edgic and a lot of people just on Survivor, like forums and Facebook groups and Reddits, have been actually comparing Couture's edit to the Sandra edit in Heroes versus Villains, which I kind of see. It's this sort of like, you need to get this guy out, like how, blah, 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 and then like she wins. I think it's kind of loose there in terms of the edit, but I think what's going to actually happen is in terms of the edit, we're more so looking at it's going to build to a huge crescendo of Couture versus Bruce, and we're literally just going to see the outcome of one of them leaving. That's kind of what I think about Couture.
I agree. That's Bruce. Kind of where I'm at too. And like I said, unfortunately,
which would be super satisfying.
I do think that the Reba 4, like basically baiting her into saying Bruce's name, that's not a good omen that she's going to get all of the credit for taking him out. That's what I'm saying.
If it builds to she takes him out.
You know what I would love, though, even though I really don't think game logic wise it's in the cards, I would really love for both of them to just straight up make Final Tribal Council.
Oh, that would be fantastic. That would be absolutely fantastic. But who knows what's going to happen with that. I think also just to kind of touch upon two other quick things, and then I'll give you the whole thing on Jake. So Kendra, I'm actually having a really hard time deciphering Kendra. She's still been relevant enough, still had a fair amount of confessionals.
Can I just say Kendra's story, like backstory this episode, genuinely one of the most emotional that we've gotten out of all these backstories for me. I don't know why. I can't even really put my finger on why, but just like the moment where she's talking about like making the phone call and then her, her biological dad is like, I've been waiting for this phone call for 18 years. Just that just got me so hard. Like, I don't know, like, there's just something about her particular story that I just found very compelling and emotional.
Well, see, that's the thing. That's why in this season versus the others, it's better to do a handful of these backstories rather than every freaking cast member has this crazy backstory, because it makes them sympathetic enough. Dee had a kind of a nice one. Jake had kind of a sad one. She had like, it's just kind of like, it's just a few that kind of gives them a little oomph to the character. So with Kendra, I mean, that was a really nice little beat that we got for her that kind of made her reward feel all the much better. Reward being the beer. But anyway, Kendra, I'm just having a hard time kind of deciphering it, but I can still see.
I'm guessing that Kendra's going to go sooner rather than later, just because if I'm reading the edit, I'm guessing that character beat for her was kind of like building her up, whereas we're getting to know her a little bit more, plus she's on the Bellow side of things, which I think is the side that is kind of in danger of getting begonged. So I would not be surprised to see her gone in the next couple episodes, like pre-Final 7.
Yeah, I mean, things are pretty even at this point, so who knows what could really happen. But the last thing that I want to touch upon, or I'll say one quick note about Bruce. Bruce, his edit can kind of confusing. They paint him sometimes as very naive and sometimes very smart. And once again, we have this whole battle of him versus Couture, which I think is ultimately what his edit is leading to. And then my last thing is Jake. I didn't really care for Jake in the beginning, and I think part of it is the Boston accent, but I have come to really like Jake as a player and as a person. I think he is a smart player, but the cards just kind of aren't in his favor to pull shit off. But I honestly think what we're seeing with Jake's edit, literally from the first stage of the game to this stage of the game, is he is also another tragic hero. All the stuff early on in the game was just about his body quitting despite all the effort that he's put in to him trying to better himself physically and also mentally. And then this second stage of the game is him being like, I'm not going to be the the person who follows everyone else, and I am going to make my moves. And once again, it's just not in the cards. I just feel a tragic end to his story at some point in the near future.
Oh, really? That's how you read it? I read it as final tribal council loser.
Zero vote finalist, possibly.
Just because, like, I think he is incredibly, like, his edit very much reminds me of Owen Knight. Very similar character to Owen Knight for me personally.
That's a good comparison.
Especially Owen's post-merge game. But I do think that Jake is a lot more game savvy than Owen was, because Owen's whole thing is that genuinely throughout that whole season, he just didn't really know what was going on. Whereas I think Jake, at the very least, Jake knows what's going on. His problem is that he's having a hard time, making an action and making other people and this has been a season where it's kind of interesting that in spite of the fact that the character stuff has all been fantastic, the votes by and large have been pretty lopsided and boring for the most part. With, I don't want to say boring, but we've had a lot of really dogpile votes that Jake has very much been trying to fight against. So yeah, Jake, for me, I don't think he's going to win, but I do think he has a chance if something, he has some time still to get something going and to pull off something and to get people's respect. At the time, currently, I just don't see it, but I also don't see him leaving anytime soon, just because he is one of those people, kind of like you mentioned with Drew. It's kind of funny, Casey, because I kind of read Jake's edit like you read Drew's edit, where I see Jake's connections to all these people, like Kendra and Katura and Bruce and, even Emily to a certain extent. And it's I see that, and that to me is ties to potential final tribal council. So that's my read. I would, at this point, I'd be surprised if Jake didn't at least make the finale, if not the final tribal council. And in my heart of hearts, I would love for Jake to win. I just don't think it's going to happen logically. I don't think he's going to get enough capital. But then again, a lot of people are saying Katura could win, where I truly think Jake has a little bit more agency in this game than Katura has had, because Katura basically has just been strung along. That's my thing. Whereas Jake at least is self-aware enough that he's refusing to be strung along.
I mean, that's the thing. I'll say this, because I know we're getting really close to the end of our time here. I could definitely see that. I mean, that's the thing. I really could see almost any of these people winning, but I do think I see some of these people's arcs as if you fail, I know exactly why you failed. All of your content was there to show your downfall. Katura being one of them, Jake being another, even Kendra too.
Obviously, Bruce.
and Bruce, yeah. Pretty much all the Bellow people.
Yeah.
But yeah,
honestly, down the line, I think everyone kind of has that, where they all kind of have some sort of Achilles heel to them.
Yeah, which once again is it's all there. All the information's there. We're just trying to figure out how these pieces fit together. But yeah, I really like Jake. He's really grown on me. I find, at least in my circles of the Survivor community, Jake is actually really, really, really hate it, which is crazy. I was shocked the past couple episodes, especially to see how many people hate Jake. But I actually think his edit
that's crazy. He's such a likable guy to me.
Yeah, I honestly think it's the fucking Boston accent, which is such a shame, because you have everyone that loves Boston Rob.
I find the Boston accent to be refreshing, specifically because it's not Boston Rob, honestly. It's finally another Boston guy who's not just Boston Rob. I don't know.
It's absolutely.
My grandma asked me if he had a speech impediment the other day, and I was like, no, it's just a Boston accent.
Yeah. But anyway, let's just kind of finish this off here. Do you have any final thoughts before we conclude this?
Jeff Probst taking out that damn knife and cutting the hole in the bag of rice is one of the all-time great Jeff Probst moments for me. I fucking loved it so much.
Yeah, the sense of panic.
That's the only thing else I wanted to say is in regards to, like, you know, because Jeff obviously isn't like a winner contender, but he is still should be a part of the story in some capacity, and that was a great way of making him part of the story. So
yeah, I kind of love to see those moments again with Jeff. Just assuming it doesn't get to his head and then he becomes like super devious in altering.
Right, which I could totally see him doing, like a heel turn.
Yeah, but I enjoy the little Jeff character moments. There's beautiful compilations on YouTube for all of his sassy moments.
But I also want to talk to you about the auction, but we can do that off air.
Yes, yeah, because we are a little pressed for time.
Yes,
but I guess if that's it, I'll just conclude this, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I apologize if it seems like we're a little bit all over the place. We're both rushed for time, trying to figure out a time to actually film this podcast. So this was our only time, and we were pressed. But nonetheless, I hope everyone's enjoyed this. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And
2 triple shots, or just one in this case. I have been drinking a triple shot this whole time.
I did see that earlier. But yeah, tune in for what will be our final podcast once the season wraps up. But thanks. Have a good night.